Hey there, listeners. Welcome to STJ's Breaking Into podcast series, the podcast where we speak with professionals with glittering careers working at the top of their respective tree as CEOs, managing directors, board members, and directors or heads of function. And we deep dive into where they started and what they've been through to get to where they are today. The series is aimed at answering the question, how did they get that job? And perhaps, how can you get that job? So it is aimed at professionals who are either about to embark on their chosen career, or perhaps those who just fancy a change and would like to get some insight into what it really takes to climb the corporate ladder from people who have successfully been there and done it. I'm your host, Kris Bryant, and following a career of more than 27 years, with many of those as a Director of Compliance, Risk and Financial Crime, and operating at board level, I have for a number of years now been the founder and director of STJ Consultancy Solutions, your trusted partner in all things consultancy and recruitment, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join us on this journey. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate and review our podcast on your favourite platform. Your support helps us to keep bringing you engaging content. Also, if you have any ideas or suggestions on topics you would love for us to cover, people you'd like for us to get on the show, or suggestions on specific roles you'd be interested in hearing about, then please do put information in the comments or send us an email at info@stjconsultancysolutions.co.uk and we will do our best to oblige. So on today's episode, we'll be delving into the upper echelons of financial crime compliance. I'm delighted to be joined by someone who has been there and done it and now operates as a global head of financial crime, Linda Baskett. Linda has very kindly agreed to join us today and talk through her experiences, discuss her journey to the top and give a few details on what it really takes to make it in the world of financial crime compliance. So a very warm welcome to you, Linda.
Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to chatting through my career and hopefully it will be useful to somebody.
Well, you've had a great journey, so I'm sure everybody's itching to hear about it. So to start us off, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your current role.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently Global Head of Financial Crime at ComputerShare. ComputerShare is a company that predominantly works in the share registry. So that's managing and updating, running share registers for issuers. We also have a plans business, which is the management and operation of share schemes generally associated to employment. And we do a lot of company secretariat, kind of corporate trust activity that helps people get onto stock exchanges and launch themselves, years onwards kind of thing. So very diverse from the rest of my career, but very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I manage a global team, so I have some people in various locations in the United States, some people in the UK and in Australia. So I tend to operate slightly odd working hours to accommodate that. But yeah, it's an interesting and very different role to what I've had before.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit of background in a little while. But so in the current role, what would be your most challenging aspects of the role, do you think, and how do you manage them?
So I think it's understanding a different industry. My career up to this point has been pensions, life insurance, and then insurance, general insurance, reinsurance. And culturally, it's a very different place to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's also quite a complex structure. That's been another challenge, but it's good. I like a challenge. I don't like to sit and not achieve a lot. We've just been restructuring, so I've been there 2 years now, which has given me enough time to see how the team was operating and to see where we can provide value to the business. I like to think I'm quite a commercially minded person, so I like to make sure that the teams that I lead actually are heavily involved with the business, helping the business, adding value, understanding their strategic objectives, and what we do should be mapped so that it supports them to achieve those objectives.
Yeah. So with that in mind, then I suppose, how do you balance that need for relatively strict compliance with the goals of the business and what they're trying to achieve?
Yes. So there's always a way. I think partly it's to do with having a look at what we need to do from a regulatory and legal perspective and thinking that through and applying it. I have actually been in conversations recently about the risk-based approach versus more principles driven. And I'm a big fan of risk based because I feel it allows you that room to interpret and adjust according to your risk appetite. I don't think a regulator's ever challenged anyone on their risk decisions as long as those decisions are evidenced and have been appropriately challenged and all of that kind of thing. So I quite like that. I also say it's to do with trying to get to get in their heads and understand what's important to them. And BGT's biggest financial crime risk is fraud. So we are talking to the business a lot about fraud controls. And they've just launched a big digitization program, which gives us a massive opportunity to front load our control environment and stop people at the door from getting in that aren't the people that we should be dealing with.
Yeah.
So it's just about their objective is to provide a seamless experience, to provide customers and clients with the ability to manage their things themselves. Whereas I'm going, okay, this is great, but if we slot in a good tech solution up front on a fraud prevention perspective, we're quids in. So it's just, I think it's always about trying to align your thoughts and having those discussions. And if you've got data to back it up, that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. So with that similar line of thinking, then how do you think technology is going to impact financial crime roles in the future?
So I think it's going to be massive. I think the financial crime officer, manager, whatever you want to add on the end there, I think that role in the next 5 to 10 years, if maybe not even sooner, is going to look very different. I think it's about everyone's on the ball with trending, analysing the information that you have. Obviously, we're naturally moving into spaces which are very technically orientated, like crypto and blockchain, and with new challenger banks and fintech startup things all over the place, it's all becoming very tech focused. So I get the feeling that the days of I'm more of a compliance person, which means I'm more of a rules interpreter and sort of a risk-based view kind of person, which I'm hoping will still be there. Otherwise, I'll be out of a job. But I think a lot of it is moves more into that techie space, whether you're interpreting a system that you've got or you're analysing internal stuff. It's just, I think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think that largely depends on just how much firms embrace it too, right? I mean, you can see the regulators started to embrace tech for sure, and are really kind of step behind it within reason. But I think the main challenges firms are having is that they've got all these front end and back end systems that don't always necessarily talk to each other. So moving towards more tech solutions and AI and various other things, they're only as good as what you feed into them, right? So they start to produce a lot of different risks that perhaps weren't there before. So they help you to mitigate some risks and then create others.
And that's one of the biggest challenges of implementing any system is tidying up the data that you're putting into it in the first place. So yeah, it is a big challenge, and I suppose that's kind of why I think 5 to 10 years, because some of the the more established organizations will have legacy systems. They'll have bought businesses that are on different systems, and trying to coordinate all of that is a bit of a mission for them. But I think they'll find that there's commercial advantages to it. And once you've got that, then you've got the appetite then to sort of tidy up what you've got and put it into a system that's better.
Absolutely agree. So that's your current role. Really great overview there, so thank you for that. I'm going to backpedal completely now and wind right the way back to the beginning. So to start with, as a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So probably in my early teens, I'm trying to think of when it happened, but I got what some might deem an unhealthy obsession with crime. It was around, I think it was around the time of the Rose and Fred and Rose West murders. And I think there was, it was that case that really kind of brought out criminal psychology and understanding what had driven people. Now, I think I haven't read them for ages now, but over those years, I read whatever book you could throw at me around that particular case. And also, there was a guy who I think was a psychologist on that case who was called the Jigsaw Man. And I really started to get really interested in what made a person who's just like me, maybe, or maybe not, but what made someone do that kind of thing, and what drove them to it. I remember going to see my careers tutor, and for those listening, I'm using inverted commas because he actually was just a chemistry teacher, so I'm not quite sure what qualified him. And I said I wanted to do the Marks and Spencer's graduate program. That was all I was really interested in. I wanted to do business studies. And he said to me, no, that's not good enough. It won't stimulate you. It's not interesting enough. You can just do it in a short time. I said, okay. He said, just go away and have a rethink. Because of my interest in all things criminal, I went and did a psychology taster weekend at Swansea University. So I thought, yeah, okay, maybe I'll do that. So I then tried to find a program that had a criminology element to it. And I ended up doing psychology and sociology at Reading, and loved the criminology, just gulped that up as much as I could. So I really wanted to, when it finished, I did, my dissertation involved the probation service. So when I left uni, I thought, okay, I want to be a probation officer. And I applied, and obviously I was fresh out of uni at 21, no life experience, didn't get in. Thought, well, I can't sit here and not have a job. So applied for other jobs, had roles. And then when the next round came, I applied again and didn't get in again. And then I thought, at the time I was working for the local council, it wasn't very exciting. Didn't really need to know much about murderers there. So I applied for a job at what then was the National Criminal Intelligence Service. And it was like a big en masse recruitment to get people in as criminal intelligence officers. And I ended up in the financial intelligence unit. I think it was just, I don't know what they deemed the decision on, but you just got offered a role in one of these units. And then I started there, and honestly, that still to this day is probably the best job I've ever had. Probably due to my age and having no kids and being single and being able to enjoy a social life. But it was just fantastic. The probation service came around again, and I applied again. And this time I got an offer. It sounds very mercenary, but at that point, the NSIS had done a pay review, and we were about to get a £3,000 pay hike. And I would have had to have missed that out and probably take a drop to go to the probation service. So I was a little bit like, oh, do I really want to do this? So I called up the guy that I did my dissertation with, and I said to him, okay, remind me why I wanted to do this, because I can't remember. And I think sometimes you have this thing in your head, and when you knock back after knock back, you kind of lose your mojo for why you wanted to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
So I was chatting it through to him, and he said, if 1 in 10 offenders don't come back round, you're doing a good job. And I was like, 1 in 10? And I thought, wow, that's really low. And I've always been ambitious. And for me, I thought, this isn't the right thing to do for me. There began over 20 years for me now, career in financial crime.
So how did that translate from that to jumping into financial crime? Where did this start?
So I decided that, so I guess I rationalized it in my head of, I can fight crime, but I can fight crime by finding the money associated to crime. I think they've done a really good job of selling it to us and saying, all crimes generally involve some sort of financial element. and you can be part of this. I started off, and this is how old I am, is I literally used to type SARS into a system because people used to send them in handwritten.
Wow.
I mean, it's just unheard of now, I know. And so my first sort of 6 to 9 months were just typing, and then I did some work specifically focused on VAT fraud with Revenue and Customs.
Mm-hmm.
And that got really interesting. So we would talk to them about what they needed, and then I would go and try and find it. And then if I started developing an intelligence package for them, I could talk to them about whether or not it would be useful. And then from there, I went on to do other projects with the Met Police and the National Crime Squad. And a couple of those actually, stuff happened. I developed intel, gave it to them, they made arrests, there were prosecutions. It was great. It was like, this is really feel like I'm fighting crime. And then the proceeds of Crime Act came in, which created the ability for you to be a financial crime investigator without having to be a police officer.
Yeah.
So I applied to do that, and I went moved over to the National Crime Squad and spent just over a year there. I did my full qualification, working on a multidisciplinary team looking for the money that was associated to immigration crime, so people smuggling. It was interesting, but it was very slow. You have to do everything by the book. I just kind of thought after a while, this really isn't for me. And I was struggling a bit with it, but then they started talking about soccer, which was when the first attempt to merge everything together. I just sat, and I remember talking to my best friend and saying, I just don't know where this is going to go. And it sounds like they're basically going to give all the crims a bit of a holiday while they sort themselves out. And she said to me, what are you still doing there? Just go and get another job. So I was like, yeah, okay, sound advice. So I always had in my head, there was a triangle. So you have the people that develop the intelligence in the FIU, you then have the people that investigate, and then you have the private sector, which is the originator of all the SAR reports, which are then developed into intel. So I thought, right, I need to go now and experience the other part of the triangle, the third part. And I ended up in working for Legal and General, where I was there for 6 years. So that was quite good. But that's kind of what then put me into private sector. And then that was it, really, the start of the career in insurance, pensions, investment.
And how much different did that feel to going through the authorities and financial intelligence units? And that's quite different, right?
Yeah, so my boss at the time was obsessed with the fact that I I would struggle to understand business, and I didn't think I did that much. But I remember once having a conversation with the people on listening to this who won't know what I'm talking about. But I did have to say to it one time that we didn't all run around like the Sweeney in roll necks and leather jackets, talking to each other like this geezer, kind of. That wasn't really the way it operated. So I suppose looking back now, the adjustment was probably bigger than I thought it was. But
Yeah.
I'm always quite bright, and I'm quite able to follow a good lead.
Imagine with the Sweeney and various others, you take your stereotypical criminal, I think it'd be a lot easier to spot than they are.
Yeah, very true. They're very different type of criminals nowadays, aren't they? All
Yeah,
behind
absolutely.
a computer.
So you mentioned SARS earlier, so that's, for anybody not sure what that is, that's a suspicious activity report. So what does that involve for you, and you had to get involved?
So it's interesting, actually. Obviously, there's an obligation placed on financial services firms to make a suspicious activity report. But as a recipient of those, and as someone who's worked to investigate those, I often find myself in a position where I am in a sort of conflict, I suppose, over I might have a CRO who's obsessed that we need to report a suspicious activity because that meets the regulatory obligations, whereas I'm saying that is useless as intelligence. There is nothing in there that people could use. And I think it is interesting because having that view, tends to mean that I make sure that when they're submitted, they're actually, I'm hoping, better than perhaps others or people who haven't been in there, because I know what people are looking for.
Yeah.
But then I don't like people who say, well, I mean, God, I worked there in 2001 to 2005. So that's a long time ago. And I did have a conversation with someone from the NCA, now the NEC, the National Economic Crime Command, recently. And I said, like, I used to work there. So but I bet it's changed a lot. And they actually said it's not changed that much, to be honest. So that's good, because that reassures me that I still kind of feel that, I can connect things up better. But yeah, no, I think you often find yourself in that situation where regulator demands clash with what's actually practical. And then what ends up is you end up with an intelligence system filled with rubbish. Almost going back to the point we made earlier about bad data in, it's bad data out. I would like to see some change to that setup, that whole, the regulatory obligations side of things versus the quality of what's going in. I think it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and hence, the financial intelligence units are incredibly busy, and I'm not sure about your own experience, but I assume it's the same. But whenever you submit SARS, it's very rare that you actually get a response, because they are just so busy. You can only focus on what's really important, right? And again, it goes back to what you said about quality of data. How much you can give them and what they can actually do with it once they get it.
Yeah, I do get a little frustrated, because I remember when they were talking about soccer, one of the key drivers was feedback to the private sector.
Yeah.
And then I sort of went off into private sector, and I think it was 2012. I went to a conference, and no, maybe it was a bit later than that. I think it was 12 years. It was 12 years had passed, and there was somebody there who was still talking about how important feedback to the private sector was. And I was like, that's 12 years you've been talking about that, and you haven't done it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's a challenge, because they can't reply to every single person. But I think and I know that there are other issues associated to this, but it would be really cool if we could get it so that when your SAR has been used,
Yeah.
you get to know about it.
Yeah, exactly right. I think resource is always an issue, right? With any function, whether it's private sector, FIUs, or anywhere else. So I kind of get why they can't respond to everybody. But like you say, it'd be great if you could get some kind of feedback if something was used and it's actually led to something, so you could feel like it's been useful.
Yeah, because I think most of us are really passionate about what we do in the private sector, and we know the role we play, and we want to feel like what we're doing actually has some positive impact. I think there are other complexities around sort of SARS being used and then being disclosed, non-disclosed, in court cases, protecting IDs of people and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there must be a way to be able to feedback.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think it's not beyond the realms of possibility, right? But
Mm.
who's to know if it's going to happen anytime soon?
Yeah.
So how do you think the landscape has changed a bit in financial crime during your time in the industry?
Well, it's been really interesting actually to see fraud come as like the big risk nowadays. We obviously still talk a lot about anti-money laundering and sanctions. I think, and I think it's probably COVID driven as well, as people had to find other ways to make money because they couldn't move goods and move goods, i.e. drugs, people, whatever they want to move so freely, that they had to find an alternative. So that fraud became like the big thing. I question the sanctions regimes and their effectiveness. There's a book, McMaster by Misha Glenny, and I read that ages ago. He in that questions the sanctions regimes. Yeah, that's always made me, obviously we have to comply with them.
Yeah.
But it makes me a little skeptical about how effective they are. And when you think some of the countries that are on there have been on there for ages,
Yeah.
the aim of that is to drive change, not
it's highly political there, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's something I don't want to get into.
No, indeed.
Um,
So for new or developing people that are looking into what they can do within financial crime and moving themselves through their career, what would you think are the key skills that somebody might need to succeed?
uh, I think having an analytical mind and a questioning mind, sort of don't take anything for granted. That's a good approach. But also, I think you have to be confident to make decisions, but make decisions based on fact.
Yeah.
And that can be quite difficult sometimes. And in some cases, it's a lot of it can be
Mhm.
speculative. And you have to kind of roll yourself back a little bit and say, hang on, what do I actually know about this
Yeah.
situation? I think if you're working in a financial services firm and you're interested in financial crime, trying to reach out to those teams and trying to get a position in house is probably a really good way to start.
Mm.
One thing I wish, well, I've seen others make a jump from law enforcement to private sector, as I did. And I feel like some of them, and maybe it's just my own sort of imposter syndrome sneaking in, but I feel like the ones that are flying and like doing really well are the ones that have worked for
Mhm.
consultancies. And I've never done that. I probably was, when I was a bit younger, too bolshy for that.
It's an environment where you really again need to have a very analytical mind and someone who's prepared to delve deep into everything and root cause analysis and really understand the mechanics of it all. Which
Yeah.
again, from a financial crime perspective, is quite key, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Root cause analysis is actually a thing I think is sometimes missing as a skill,
Yeah.
but it's really important. You need to find out what's driving the activity that you're seeing and how has how does that impact your control environment
Yeah.
and what needs to improve to kind of shut the door.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah, and or even just just the principles of root cause analysis are useful from an investigation perspective and understanding what's happened and how did it get to that point, and not just
Yeah.
accepting the first thing you get to as being the reason why, and having that, as you say, that confidence to just keep digging and asking why, and get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So, how do you stay updated with things that change in regulation and financial crime trends and practices?
So I am, and this varies, I think, between organizations. So at some firms, you are only allowed to attend 3 events, whereas at other firms, they are more willing to kind of pay for you to attend some of the conferences. So currently where I am, they are quite happy for me to attend various conferences, and I find that really useful for 2 reasons. So one, it's listening to other people's experience, and people turn up from law enforcement, they'll turn up from the government, there'll be people from different sectors giving their views, but also it's a great networking opportunity. And I always spend sort of in the morning, probably maybe 15 to 30 minutes looking at what's going on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And I find that really, really useful. People sharing, various articles, the CEO letters that have come out from the regulator, actually cases where people have been prosecuted. So it's a really useful way to do it. And having a good network also helps you find the right conferences. But yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it's good to have good people that to run ideas by too, right? I mean, sometimes you'll see something that happens, um, and sometimes it makes you kind of quiz yourself a little bit and think, well, am I heading down the right path here? So it's great to have a good network of people who you can speak to and say, look, this is what I'm thinking. Do you agree? Should I be looking somewhere else? And and try and kind of air all these things and help you to process them.
Yeah, there's a few. I do a few senior women in financial crime get-togethers
Mhm.
throughout the year as well, and they're really useful. Just to understand what other people are doing and the challenges.
Yeah, that's really good. I think more of us could do those, right? I mean, for anybody.
Yeah.
So for people coming up through the industry, what about from an educational or qualification perspective?
So, the International Compliance Association seem to have a bit of monopoly on qualifications. I would always recommend doing a financial crime prevention one over an anti-money laundering one, because anti-money laundering will be included, but it gives you the broader spectrum. There's a new one that they recently launched about, I think it's something like financial crime and emerging technologies or new technologies or something like that. Which is useful. But I've recently, because I'm having a global job now, I needed to find something that I could use that would apply more broadly than, because the ICA is very good, but it's very UK focused.
Yeah.
So my team sat ACFCS qualifications, which is Association of Certified Financial Crime something or others. Can't remember the full acronym, which is really bad because I'm trying to do some work with them going forward.
We will get exposed to an awful lot of acronyms in what we do, right? So you can't always
Yeah. Yeah. Now, but one thing I would say about these is they're very theory based. And people that I've had who are in my teams who have been working in the environment for a long time have sometimes struggled because they are sort of very specific. And like the big example for ICA, and ICA is great. I'm not meaning to play it down, but one of their requirements for a diploma is to write a board report. Someone in my team has just done this and had the feedback that her board report wasn't long enough. But actually, in practice, if your board report is too long, nobody will read it.
No,
So
absolutely.
you have to, and I think that's probably one of the biggest jumps in my life has been from coming out of university and writing, essays as of evidenced and very detailed,
Yeah.
to then learning how to write in a corporate way. And it's a
Yeah.
very, very different way. And the more pictures you can put into a board report, the better. And the more data you can throw in, the better. It's
Yeah.
something that's visually stimulating and engaging, but short and punchy is exactly what people are looking for. And I do feel that these courses sometimes don't cover those bits. So they're great for like as a starting point, but just be mindful that there is that difference, I think.
Yeah, and there's potentially a little bit of a gap in the market there, because that's some of the things that when you get to this level, nobody teaches you, right? You have to kind of learn as you go.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to do. Like you say, in my experience too, is boards tend to want, what is the issue? What are we doing about it? Is everything okay? If not, what are we doing? But it needs to be, like you say, quite concise. But the report itself can be very concise. But then when you get into the weeds of it within the actual meeting and you talk about it, the minutes should then reflect that wider conversation, and that's where the kind of meat on the bones comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. I am hoping I hope I don't speak too preemptively, but I am hoping to start a voluntary role with ACFDS
Right.
on their advisory board. And part of the discussions, I've had one round of discussions, I've got another one next week. Part of the discussion was trying to make it more like that, more practical, I think, rather than theoretical. Because as another one of my team has just done their qualification, guy based in the US, he said, I sometimes struggled because I didn't remember the exact part of the legislation, as in like, the right section and the right paragraph number and all this. But he said, but I can look that up in my day-to-day job. Part of what I want to be able to contribute to ACFCS is this ability to tweak it so it's less, it's less what you could find on the internet, but more about the practical application of that.
Yeah, that would be really useful. I've like yourself, I've come up to it myself, having to kind of learn as I go.
Yeah.
And using networks and other people that do the job to try and talk these things through, rather than having anyone that teaches you, the finer points on practicality.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to anybody starting their career in financial crime compliance?
I would find an industry that you like, or you think you might like. Because before you know where you are, you blinked and you've done 15 years in insurance, as have I. Unintentionally, because I was quite whimsical when I just took that first role. So I think it's absolutely think about what you enjoy and where you think you might want to be. Organizations are very different. So if you were to join like a high street retail bank or building society, you'll be one person in a larger team. Is that for you, or do you want to be in maybe a newer challenger kind of environment that's you've got a lot of responsibility, but it is only maybe you and 5 other people at a push?
Yeah.
But also, if you're not sure, I would absolutely just pick one, see how it goes, and then see where that leads to.
Yeah.
I think I remember trying to move on from legal and general when I'd been there about 5-6 years, and my mum said, "Well, that's not long enough." And I think that's a real older way of thinking about things. I think nowadays, when I'm looking for people, I like to see people who have done different jobs at different firms, because they'll bring you all the best bits from those companies that they've worked for.
Some still like to see people who've got longevity in their role, but it's less and less. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I'd probably say 4 to 5 years, because lots can happen. And it does take a while to kind of understand an organization and its aims. But yeah, what I tend to do is work in a role until I find myself getting a little bored. And that tends to happen when I feel like I've done the big change programs and there's not much exciting coming down the line, and we're just going to hit BAU, and I'm not a great person for BAU because it doesn't excite me. I need to have something to get my teeth into, and
feel like you're adding value.
Yeah, exactly. Just ticking stuff over doesn't float my boat. I get to a certain stage and then have to find the next challenge.
Yeah. So, are there any common misconceptions about financial crime that spring out to your mind?
We're not the police. I think that's the biggest one. Like, some organisations I've worked for are heavily staffed with ex-law enforcement, and actually the last 2 firms, there's been a secret cupboard with like a dictaphone and evidence bags and all this. And I'm like, why do we need those? I think it's almost an element of stay in your lane. So our lane is to identify this stuff, and if we think there's a problem, we should be referring it on to the right people that can deal with it. And if there needs to be recorded interviews, I'm not even sure, to be perfectly honest, anything like that would stand up in court. So I don't really know why we would do that. But I do think we make a massive contribution, and that's our role, really. It's interesting, the first versus, so the 3 lines of defence model, which is not yet fully implemented, I would say, in all financial services firms. There's different levels of maturity of it. But first line is your business, so the people that deal with the operational side of things, and they're dealing with the customers. And then second line is compliance, and we're more an advisory function. And financial crime generally tends to sit in the second line in that space. And then third line is internal audit, that checks that everybody's doing what they should be doing in first and second line. So I think it's interesting because there's been this sort of new concept of line 1.5, which is kind of a business-led advisory function that kind of straddles the both. So the original question was, isn't it, what's the misconception? So I think for me, financial crime is firmly a second line function.
Yep.
And first line should be doing everything, as in the controls and everything. They own the risk, they own the controls, and they operate those controls. You can do some second line checking, and you should do second line checking. But I think having that clear is probably a good place to be.
Yeah, more of a more of a QA checking rather than a second line checking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think first line have got a really prime position to be able to spot this stuff and hand it on to second line to then do the investigation and reporting when necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. First line in all the training I ever do, first line are the key.
Mhm.
First line are the people that know that, our products and services don't normally operate this way, or I'm being asked to do something that seems a little bit out of the ordinary. And all you ask them to do is to almost, we ran a campaign in my previous role. It was the nose knows. And basically we said, if it smelt funny, it probably was, and you need to just flag it. And it was really successful because, years ago, we used to train people going back to the point of, what regulation did this? What year did this come in? It's all completely irrelevant. What you need to hone is the fact that they just need to be able to spot something that smells fishy and flag it, and then we'll do the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. So for somebody looking to get into a financial crime role, let's say, somebody who's looking to take a role under your team in a relatively junior position, how could they make themselves appear attractive as somebody you might want to employ?
I employed somebody who had no financial crime experience, but had worked in the legal sector and had like an understanding of how the law worked, and just had great organizational skills, a really good attitude, really willing to learn. And that she was a successful hire for me because we could teach people the financial crime side of things. The higher up you go, the more you realize that we all do it slightly differently at a senior level.
Yeah.
So I'm quite happy to bring people into my team who don't have a huge amount of experience in financial crime if they maybe tend to have experience within the business, or just comparable experience in another sector, like in a risk or compliance type environment. I think understanding the concepts of like 3 lines of defense and things, and how firms operate, is really, really important.
Yeah.
It can teach you that this is money laundering, this is bribing, corruption, this is fraud. And I think having the passion, it's having the interest there, really.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Similarly to you, I think most of us at a relatively senior level within financial crime compliance, wherever it may be, I think we can all be fairly confident in our ability to train and develop people to do a job within our own team. What you can't teach somebody is to have the passion or the interest or the attitude to want to do the job. So that was always the really big thing for me when interviewing anybody is, what is actually driving them to do this job, and how interested are they in it?
Yeah, exactly. And years ago, when I was at NSIS in the FIU, I was promoted to team leader, and they did another round of sort of hires, like mass hiring, and I got a few new members for a team. And one of the girls, I mean, let's be honest, there were parts of that job that are very dull. So you're looking at the information in a star, and you're going through hundreds of alerts trying to see if there's any other information that can match to that, that's going to build a picture. And you could sit for hours just going through pages and pages and pages of alerts. But when you find the one, that's when everybody gets really excited, and they're like, whoa, hang on, we might have something here. And she had she had done her probation, and I'd extended it because I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but she wasn't performing the same rate as others. And I sat with her a couple of times, and we would go through everything, and we found a hit, and I was like, oh right, great, we've got a hit, that means there's like more there, we can start digging it. And she just didn't get excited. And I ended up having a conversation with her where I said, listen, I really don't think this job's for you. And I said, I'm not being negative, but that whole buzz I got then, you don't have. And I'm just really not sure this is where you want your career to be. And she went away and she thought about it, and she came and said, you're absolutely right. And she resigned and she moved on. Now I have no idea what happened to her, but I'm hoping she had a glorious career doing something that she really did interest her. So you're right. Going back to that, it's like having that passion and that appetite is what you need.
Yeah, you can't teach that, right?
No,
It's either there or it's not.
exactly.
So to round up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners who are perhaps interested in breaking into financial crime compliance?
Yeah, well, just a generic probably piece of career advice is when you find a good line manager, hold on to them and get as much as you can from them. Because I've had probably two, it sounds terrible really, but probably only two really good line managers in my career. Actually, I've just got the most out of them, and they've supported me and they've helped me, and sometimes they've given me, criticism, but it's always for the greater good.
Yeah.
And they've shaped who I am today and where I've got to. Um, and then the other bit is, try loads of different opportunities, but if you find one that doesn't suit you, don't be afraid to say this isn't for me and to move on to a different, try something else. But yeah.
Really great advice there. Well, thank you for that. So I'm sure that everybody would agree it's been quite a journey today. We've had a really good overview of what you've been up to and where you've come from. So on behalf of the listeners and myself, I'd love to say a really huge thank you to you for joining us today and talking about everything that you've been up to. I'm sure there will be loads out there who would find the show really useful and interesting and highly valuable to their career. So thank you very, very much.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.